All right, in the interest of time and not to keep anybody waiting any longer, first off, I want to say hello to everybody and thank you for joining us and really thank you for your interest in Striker systems. Hopefully, you've all logged on here today to learn a little bit about a key component of Striker Systems solution offering, which is called PARTshare. All right. My name is Darren Sweat, guys, and I'm the Regional Sales Manager with Striker. Today's webinar is going to focus specifically on our PARTshare interface module. And while I know that many of you might already be familiar with it to some degree, a lot of you on here may not be at all, and both of you are in the right place. So we think we put something together for you that'll be meaningful and beneficial. As we get started, first thing I want to do is let me take the opportunity and introduce the other Striker team members that we have joining us today. And they're joining us from our corporate office location in White House, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, just north of there by 25 miles or so. So first up is Mike Boggs. And if you guys have ever had any dialogue with Striker systems in the past, you've probably spoken with Mike at some point in time. You know, Mike has been with our company now for over 29 years. And he leads not only our national sales efforts, but all of our marketing and operations departments as well. It's a pretty safe bet to say that Mike has more experience and in-depth knowledge of CAD, CAM, nesting software and solutions than anybody in this industry. And if you've seen any of the publications that are out, Mike's been regularly recognized as such, as one of the experts that are out there. So I'm glad to have Mike joining us today, and I think you'll see why. Mike is actually going to be leading us through the technical portion of our PARTshare demonstration. So Mike, thank you for joining us today. Also joining us today is Randy Sanders. Well, Randy is our resident. He is our PARTshare product manager, and Randy has been with Striker Systems for almost 29 years. So you can see between Mike and Randy on this webinar today, we've got some good experience on here. So first off, let me real quickly tell you who we are, and I'm going to do so, and I'm going to spare you any of the sales or marketing spin that often accompany stuff like this. Striker is recognized as a leading developer of sheet metal CAD, CAM, and nesting software for CNC profile cutting, which is laser, plasma, water jet, basically all of your 2D, your two-axis applications, and punching operations. We are machine manufacturing neutral and independent, and we support virtually all cutting and punching machine manufacturers. So one of the key differences about our product offerings is that from the beginning, we opted to build our solution on an underlying AutoCAD platform, this AutoCAD engine, which means that our standard is the DWG or DXF file format. If you're familiar with what any of our competitors out in the industry do, you'll know that they built their product from a ground up and they use a more restrictive proprietary file format, and this can often be problematic when a company wants to share their files because only that respective software can open those files that were created and saved in that program. Well, when you save any file with Striker Systems, you're saving in a format that can be opened by any software that can open or read a DWG or DXF, which, as we all know in the industry today, is darn near any software that's out there. We are and have been a privately held corporation since our inception, all the way back in 1985. And then finally, all of our product development, our technical support, our customer service are based out of our corporate office in White House, Tennessee. What exactly is PARTshare? Well, PARTshare is a comprehensive part storage library and a retrieval module that sits at the heart of Striker CAD, CAM, and nesting solutions. It serves as a gateway for part sharing between multiple Striker CAD/CAM licenses, and it's also the storage location for our SS Nest automatic nesting module. It maintains flat pattern geometry for nesting and for NC processing, along with all the detailed part data that's required for manufacturing, things such as material properties and revision information, etc. Now, while I mentioned that PARTshare is basically for storage, retrieval, and sharing of flat parts, one of its key uses can also be to automate the transfer of both part and assembly data, along with all of the supporting manufacturing information that may be in those files. Striker has a single button add-in for SOLIDWORKS, Autodesk Inventor, and Solid Edge. And this allows you the ability to bring in those files in their native format if PARTshare resides on a workstation with that respective SOLIDWORKS, Inventor, or Solid Edge. So there's a whole lot of features that are unique to PARTshare, and while we're not going to go over all of them today, I'm pretty sure that Mike's going to show you enough so that you can see just how powerful that it is here in just a minute. I wanted to give you just a quick example to show you how a typical PARTshare configuration might look like. There is no standard configuration, but this is just an example of one configuration that it could be. So in the center of the screen, you're going to see that there's this PARTshare library that is set up as a shared network directory or a location out there, and that's going to be the repository for all of your parts and data and files. And if you look at the left-hand side of your screen, all of these guys, let's say, work in the engineering department at a company, and if you look at the slide that I put together, I guess you could say they work at a pretty confused company because they couldn't standardize or decide to go with any one particular 3D CAD package. But so you've got the guys over there in engineering with their software. PARTshare as a standalone package can be installed on each one of the workstations there in engineering so that they can transfer their part and assembly files into PARTshare without having to save these DXFs out, and then those files are made available for the guys out in manufacturing. Well, so on the right side of the screen, you see these are the guys that are in manufacturing. These are the guys that do the programming. They've got Striker systems software for CAD/CAM and nesting loaded on their machines, which is standard with PARTshare. Since engineering has placed those files out in the directory, those files are now immediately available for sharing, nesting, job creation, and to be able to work with. So PARTshare actually allows a whole lot of information transfer and allows a company to be a little more productive. So it allows free flow of information between the guys on the design side and the production side that's out there. So what I want to do now is jump over into PARTshare. We want to show you what it's all about. I'm going to change and hand control back over to Mike Boggs, and Mike will lead us through our PARTshare demonstration.
Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you taking today to come and join us for this. We're gonna fly through this demonstration relatively quickly, but as Darren mentioned, PARTshare itself it's a library and it's a technology for transferring or sharing data and just expediting and streamlining that process. Now, Striker Systems as a company, again, the core of what we do is sheet metal CAD/CAM nesting software, so for punching and cutting operations. And you'll see that what I have on my screen is a SolidWorks assembly. Now, as Darren mentioned, we do support both SolidWorks, Solid Edge, and Autodesk Inventor with this technology. I'm using SOLIDWORKS just because that's one that we do see probably the most of out there. And this is an assembly from one of our customers. It's actually an assembly from Hastings HVAC in Hastings, Nebraska, which they gave us permission to use this in demonstrations. So shout out to them. And we are going to go through and kind of show the process of going from this assembly to a nested layout to getting NC code generated. But before I do that, I want to explain kind of the basics of the library itself. So I'm going to bounce away from SOLIDWORKS for just a second, and we'll come back to it in a minute. And I'm going to come over to our Striker 2018 interface. Now, as Darren mentioned, our products since the inception many years ago now were all built on an underlying AutoCAD engine. We basically took the kernel out of AutoCAD, compiled it into our software, so it's the basic underlying graphics handling. So if anybody has any familiarity with AutoCAD, then when you see this, then the menu layout will likely look pretty familiar to you, which is actually one of the advantages of that direction, in that still AutoCAD is by far the most popular 2D CAD software in the world, and taught in every high school and trade school out there these days. So anybody coming into our environment is going to be immediately comfortable with it. Now, what I wanted to show you, you'll see a number of tabs up here. There's one for SS Profile or Striker Systems Profile. That is actually for the profile cutting. There's one for SS Nest, and we'll look at these in a minute, but you'll also see one that says Striker Systems Design. Now, this is our standard design interface, and even though the majority of our customers have moved into a 3D modeling system such as SOLIDWORKS or Autodesk Inventor, we do still have some that are using this as their primary design system, and it's perfectly capable in doing that. Now, you will notice that as I switch between the various tabs, that there is a PARTshare icon that stays on the screen at all times. And that's what I wanted to do, is take just a minute and kind of explain from the user side over in manufacturing what they're going to be seeing and how they would work with this. So if I open this up, it comes up with a dialog. And first of all, we see two tabs on here. We see a Part Libraries tab, and we see an Assemblies tab. Now, the Part Libraries tab is just that. It's individual part libraries, and I can have as many different parts in any one library as I like. Now, you can think of this kind of like a directory structure, just as you would save parts out on your hard drive. And you can create these libraries and name them however you like. We have customers that name them based on product line, based on their customers, just whatever makes sense for you. And I can create a library simply by doing a right click here and saying new library and assign a name to it. And I can very easily drag parts back and forth between libraries. And if I go and double click on any one of these parts, you see that it does have quite a bit of information that's associated with the part. So I've got a part number, which is used in defining the unique instance of that part. Description field, there is a version field. We're going to talk about this. The version field is also a unique identifier if I'm using multiple revisions of a part. And material information, these four fields down here, as you'll see, we'll be populating these coming from SOLIDWORKS. These can be customized to be whatever information you want. So in this case, I've got project status drawn by and so on. But you could have any information that you wanted to carry with this part throughout the life cycle of that part and into a manufacturing operation and ultimately print it out on all your production reports. So just be aware that can all be customized. And there are also some specific settings for nesting operations. So things like, how do I control the rotation angle that I'm going to allow on this part if I have grain constraint considerations and so on. And you'll also see there's an ignore part labeling for doing like etching on a laser, or even if you're using a punch with a Vera tool, or Trump has a new text tool, that you wanted to have it automatically apply, for instance, a part number and mark those part numbers on a part. It can do that. Now, The assembly side of this is just a list of assemblies that have either been brought across from one of these 3D modeling packages, okay, and I can tell you some of these came from SOLIDWORKS, some of them came from Autodesk Inventor, or you do also have the ability, if I wanted to go in and say, well, I want to create a new custom assembly and just add parts to it manually. So rather than having something come across from your 3D modeling software, you could just go in and create a custom assembly. And the purpose of that being that if you were going to be manufacturing based on assembly, I have a particular product, for example, and I need to be able to nest 10 of that particular product that may be comprised of 20 different parts, then I can just select that assembly and say I need to manufacture 20 of this particular assembly. Okay. Now, all of the parts that reside or are part of an assembly also are just independent parts over here in the part library. Now, with that, I want to show you a couple of things. I've got this one part on the screen. So how do you get parts into this part library? Well, obviously I can bring them across from SOLIDWORKS, etc., because that's what we're here for. But I did want to show you that I also have the ability to, one, if I either just drew them up here within the Stryker Systems environment, or if I just opened a DWG or a DXF file, then certainly I can just go add it in there. So within the PARTshare interface, I can just say new. I want to throw this part in here, and we'll give it some part number. We'll just throw a part number on here. I could give it a description. I will give it a new library name so we don't mix it in with these other parts, and we'll throw it into a library called webinar, and I'll just let the rest of that information default. Now, I have this part out here, and what I wanted to show you before we jump back into SOLIDWORKS is so what if we have multiple revisions of this part? And then that'll kind of show us how we would do that coming from SOLIDWORKS as well. Well, there's a couple of different methods, and it really depends on what your revision control process is and how you would track those parts. A lot of our customers do use a revision or assign a revision level to a part, and it is tracked absolutely through the entire life of that part through manufacturing. And certainly we can do that. Others are just going to always work from the manufacturing level with the latest instance of that part. So they just continually just update and overwrite within any engineering changes that come through. And we can accommodate that as well. So I'm going to drop this part back in. I'm going to do an insert. And I'm going to make a change to it real quick. Now, this, in reality, this is a change that probably would have been pushed over from engineering, but we'll just make it right here. So I'm going to go to what we call our auto modify command and say, okay, I've got this little slot and I'm going to modify it. And I've got a slot that's 1 inch by 1/4 inch, and we'll do something kind of obvious and we'll make it a 1/2 inch. So we're going to shorten it up quite a bit. And I'm going to say I want to update any of the similar shapes, those that match that dimension that I select. So, so I've gone in and updated all of those. Now, I could take this part and I can add it right back into the part library. And it recognizes all the part information. However, if I hit OK, well, it says that part number and version already exists. It's not going to make it that easy for me just to overwrite a part. However, as I mentioned earlier, there is this revision field. And if I assign a new rev level to it and say, okay, this is rev A, then certainly that part can go right in, and I've got the original part version and I've got revision A of that part. Okay, so just be aware Stryker Systems can track multiple revisions of a part through the PARTshare library. But I'm going to delete that one, just say delete part. This time I'm going to do what we refer to as a checkout of the part. Now, I'm going to use that same command that we used earlier, that auto modify, but this time I'm going to come over here to this notch and say I want to make that actually, let's make that 2 inches. Okay, so I adjusted that notch, and I'll adjust this hole size, which is 4.5, and we'll make that, well, we'll just make that a 3.5 inch diameter. Now, and one thing that's kind of cool about that auto modify command is if you did have to make any adjustments to any geometry that you're bringing in, that auto modify command will work on any geometry you bring in whether it's something that you created in the Striker environment or that was exported or imported from some external system, because it's just recognizing the configuration or layout of the geometry. Now, this time, since I did a checkout of that part, and you'll notice that it actually puts a little lock symbol on it. And since this is a networked library system, any other users that were on here would see that I have that part locked for checkout or for revision. And I'm just going to say, okay, I want to check this in. And if I check it back in, because I am doing an update and override of this part, it's going to ask me, okay, what's the reason? And I can give it whatever description and just say, okay. Now, I updated and overwrote that instance of that part. But one thing that's kind of cool is even though I may be not keeping track of the revisions myself, and I'm just updating and overriding that part, if I do a right click here and I go into our advanced properties, what we see in the background is there's an extended set of data, and it includes a time date stamped history of that part with whoever it was that made those changes, and if there was any description assigned, the description is given as well. Okay, so even if I'm just doing an update and overwrite, it's going to keep track of that for me in the background, so I do have access to any previous revisions of that part. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out before we jump back over to SOLIDWORKS, so you kind of have an understanding of how the library system works. Now, with that, I will come back over to our assembly in SOLIDWORKS. And before I actually extract this assembly, just to kind of show you here, I'm going to go into this particular part and open it up. So we've got an individual part open, and I'm going to come down here to the properties in SOLIDWORKS, and you see that this particular customer of ours did use or does use the properties in SOLIDWORKS pretty extensively. So they have a part number assigned and description and their material information, drawn by, drawn date. They have a lot of other information, author, project, status. They actually have a field down here that dictates whether or not this is a part that would be sent to the punch. In their case, they have punch, or which machine specifically it might be sent to. That could be controlled at this level if you choose to do so. Now, as far as PARTshare goes, and I'm going to come back over to my assembly for just a second, you will see that there is a Striker tab that's added into the system, and there is the Striker PARTshare add-in, and it's just a single button. And if I select it, it brings me into, look at that, the exact same interface that I was in from the Striker CAD CAM side. In fact, there's the same part that we just added in there. Now, in my case, I have SOLIDWORKS and the Striker CAD CAM software operating on the same computer. But be aware that in our customer situation, many times, if not most times, they do not. SOLIDWORKS or Inventor or whatever would be operating on a separate computer in engineering, and it would just be linked across the network looking at the same library. But what they would be seeing is the exact same thing that I'm seeing here. Now, if we look at the settings up here, which I wanted to point out, we will see that there is quite a setup that's available for PARTshare to kind of dial it into the specific requirements that you guys would have. And one is that you will see those 4 fields that I said could be customized. Well, you can go in and assign labels to those right here. And then if I look at the part properties, this is where the mapping would actually occur. So you can see that for part number, I have an option of saying, well, I want to use a file name, or if you're using multiple configurations in SOLIDWORKS, I could say use a configuration name. Or in this case, they had a specific property set up for part number. And we can see that's true for several of the different fields that we're populating. Okay, so it does keep you, if you're doing a just save as DXF out of SOLIDWORKS or Inventor, and then bringing that into your part library, because you're going to be manufacturing that, laying it out in a nest or what have you, for you to have to re-enter all of that data, re-enter the part number, re-enter the machine information, the material information. Of course, we know anytime you start re-entering data, you're introducing a potential that something's going to be miskeyed. So same thing for properties, or for the assembly properties. And you'll see that I do have assembly properties mapped. There's a materials, which is just, it's a material mapping just to make sure that we're consistent with the material naming convention coming across from SOLIDWORKS into the Stryker environment. Because obviously if we're nesting to process on a laser and we got to be looking up specific material tech tables based on material type, we need to make sure everything comes in with correct material. Configurations, if you do run multiple configurations in SOLIDWORKS, they are supported, as well as multi-body parts, which I don't know of anybody else out in the industry yet that supports multi-body parts, and I won't say it wasn't a bit of a challenge to get them supported, but we did. So with that, let me cancel this. Now, if I come over here to my assemblies tab, what I'm going to do initially here is I'm just going to extract this assembly, and we'll just say, okay, as an engineer, I just completed this design. It's a new product design, and I'm going to make it available for manufacturing. So I'll just come up here and hit the new button, and it's just going to retrieve a list of all of the parts that make up that assembly. Now, anything that is not a sheet metal part is going to be grayed out. So things like washers and screws and so on are just grayed out, just to show you that they are there, but they're not sheet metal parts. And that is one of the considerations, since we in the background are basically just calling into SOLIDWORKS and saying, hand me this flat part, it does have to be a sheet metal part. Now, it brings up a list of all of these parts. You can see it's all the information is mapped in. And if I go and double click on one of these parts, we see all of the information that's been mapped in there now. And you'll notice there's a status over here that says add part. And let's say that you had a part that was a sheet metal part, but wasn't something that you wanted to extract because it may be a purchased item, or maybe it just doesn't go to the laser or the punch. Well, you always have the option of just stepping through here and saying, okay, that part I don't want to include. So if there are any parts in the list, you can just turn them off so that they're not going to be extracted. Now, once I kind of got my list, now we don't have this assembly's not real big. It doesn't have a ton of parts. You know, I had a customer send me a dump truck one time, an entire dump truck bed in Autodesk Inventor, hundreds and hundreds of parts. So this list can get pretty long. So there is quite a bit of filtering capability that you have in here to be able to look at very specific materials and so on, because there are multiple material thicknesses that we are going to be extracting here. Now, if I'm satisfied with my list, I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK and let that run. And it is going to run for a couple of minutes. Now, while it does that, I'll explain, well, a few things. One, that I am doing this live. So if there's any hiccups through the rest of this presentation, be aware we're doing it live. So and computers are computers. Things happen, but hopefully everything will go smoothly. Also, if you were to take this assembly and open each one of these parts individually and save it as a flat part, and then go over to whatever your CAM system is and open that part and bring it in and assign all that information to it, you can think of how long it would take to go through that process. And even though we're going to go through a couple of minutes here, it can be a significant time saver. And the bigger that assembly gets, the more time that it can save you. And I know Darren and I were actually involved with a company here not too long ago that was using SOLIDWORKS, and they were using SOLIDWORKS configurations. And configurations we treat very much like assemblies, because I can extract all of the configurations of a SOLIDWORKS part. Well, they had a SOLIDWORKS part that they had hundreds of configurations on, and we let it run through and extract those. And we're just calling into SOLIDWORKS, asking SOLIDWORKS to hand us those parts. So it took, I don't remember, it was 35, 40 minutes, something like that, for it to run through hundreds of parts. And the reason they contacted us is because they had gone through this process and it took them hours. It took them all day to get this thing extracted. And then they had a revision. They had a revision that was going to impact every single configuration, and it had to be re-extracted. So we were able to take an all-day process, and yeah, it took 30 minutes, but we were able to take that all-day process and limit it down to just about a 30-minute process. And the other thing is while it goes through this process of extracting parts, you can continue working on other things, which I usually do if it's a very big assembly. And also this computer that I'm on, just for your performance consideration and comparison, I'm not on a fast computer here. This is actually like a 4 to 5 year old Dell laptop, which sorely needs to be upgraded, which I'm going to get around to here at some point pretty quick. I just hate changing out computers. It's such a hassle getting everything moved over. But here we have all of the parts then that were extracted. And if I double click on one of those, we see here's all of the information associated to those parts. And if I come over here to the part libraries, we see that within that webinar library that we created, which that was the last one I created, we've got all those parts out here. Okay, now, so what does that do for me? All right, I've got all my parts out there with all of the material information, all of the manufacturing information associated. Now, as soon as that becomes available through SOLIDWORKS, then back over here on the Stryker side, and again, I'm in our profile cutting software at this point, but let's say that that I just get an order that I need to go ahead and produce these parts, generate a nest and programs for these parts. Well, I can go into our Stryker Systems Nest Wizard, and I'll do a right click here and say assign a name or number to it. I'll just call this Web 01. And it takes me into this interface, and this is the interface where I could go in and grab individual parts or grab assemblies and say I want to nest those. Okay, so here's the assembly we just extracted. Well, I might say, well, I just received an order for 10 of those, so I just say, all right, I need to add 10 of that particular assembly, and there's all of the parts necessary to manufacture 10 of that assembly. Or it could be that I just get notification that there is an order available that has been generated via our ERP or MRP software. So I just need to go and run that order. So I'm going to do an import and say I want to import an MRP file, which is nothing other than a cut list of all the parts that I want to manufacture here. So I could grab that, it finds all of the parts, and I can add those into my list. So I got quite a few parts out here now. That's starting to add up into hundreds of parts. And just tell it, okay, I'm ready to nest those. Now there was 3 different material thicknesses here, the same material type, but it was 3 different material thicknesses, and it will automatically sort based on material type, material thickness, and also whatever machine it's going to. Now, one thing that I had turned on that I shouldn't have gone so fast and should have pointed out, but when our Stryker Systems Nest software runs, I have the option of either just assigning a standard sheet size, or in this case, I did tell it that I just wanted it to review my available sheet inventory and select the sheet size or sizes that were going to give me the optimum material utilization. So as I look at this, we see that it was broken down into each of those 3 different material thicknesses. And then in this case, it selected for this 060 material, it actually selected a 4x4 sheet. And as I move into the 105 material, looks like it selected a 5x4 sheet. And then finally, for my 048, it looks like it selected a 5x10 sheet size. Okay, so these nests are already here for NC code generation for laser, plasma, or even punch processing, although we'll talk about that one a little bit more in just a second. Now, I'm going to close this out for a second And just like before, we made a couple of revisions coming from SOLIDWORks, or I'm sorry, we made those revisions here and pushed them into PARTshare. Now we're going to talk about, okay, so what if we have those revisions and they are coming from SOLIDWORks? So back over here to SOLIDWORks, and I'm going to just go edit a part. And I'll tell you, I'm not really a SOLIDWORks guy, so those of you who know SOLIDWORks well, don't laugh at me here as I go through this. But I'm going to say, okay, let's just, for something simple, let's drop a simple hole on here, and I'm going to give that, say, 1 inch diameter, and we'll say that is a through hole and apply that, so we put a hole in there. Now, I could go in and say, I want to update the properties on this particular part, and that was revision 6 of that part. Now, I want to go in and update that, and we'll make that revision 7 of that part. Now, I'll just save that part, and we'll close it out. Now, there's been a revision, so we see that revision is now a part of our assembly. So obviously the assembly would need to be re-extracted or re-pushed out there if there's been any revisions that are made to it. But if we watch this, if I go back into PARTshare, I have the option now, just like we did a check-in from within the Striker CAD CAM environment, I can go to that assembly and say, well, I need to check in, and you'll notice that it recognizes that all of these parts are fine, with the exception of, there's one that has had a new revision assigned. So that new revision is going to be automatically tagged that this assembly needs to be updated with that part. And when I hit OK, then it's just going to extract that one part, update the assembly definition, and then anything done with that assembly moving forward is automatically going to have the updated information. So that would be one way of pushing a revision coming through from SOLIDWORks, just like we did before. Now, another thing that we could do is, just like we did when we just went in and updated and overwrote that part within the Striker CAD CAM, I'm going to say I want to open this part. And this is where you're really not going to want to laugh at me as I go through this. But I'm going to say I want to drop a sketch in here. So we'll select our sketch plane and just put this on here. And I'm going to go over and say I want to do an extruded cut of that, which again we'll do through and apply that. So again, I've assigned or create a new cutout in this part. Now this time, rather than going back and updating the assembly, if I just want to update and overwrite a part, I can just work here at the part level, and within the Striker environment, just come over here to my part library, and that was this part right here, and I'm just going to say, okay, let's check in and update and overwrite that part. I'm not going to assign a new revision level to it. I just want to update and overwrite that part. Now it tells me I don't have it checked out. Do I want to update it anyway? Yep, I do. And again, I could give a description of exactly how or why I'm making this overwrite, and we'll just let that default. But then it overwrites that part. And within the assembly definition, since we were just updating and overwriting that part, we see that it does have that revision. So again, anything that's done with this assembly anytime moving forward, it's just automatically going to be there. Now, With that, that kind of gives you an idea of the process of getting parts and assemblies coming across from SOLIDWORKS. And I know we're running a little long on time here, but there is one other thing that I wanted to show you. And this deals with more of the manufacturing side. So I'm going to minimize, or actually I'm going to close this for a second, close SOLIDWORKS out. And I'm going to open a new session over here in Stryker, but this time, and you'll see these are the different machine drivers or post processors that I have on this computer, and I use this for demonstration, so I got a bunch of them. But I'm going to grab a punch. And in this case, I'm going to grab, like, let's see, there's something pretty standard in a Amada EMK machine. So I'm going to load up a machine driver for this Amada EMK machine. Now, another capability that PARTshare has is being able to maintain instances of those parts specifically for certain machine operations. So I'm going to go in here, and here we see our assembly, and actually we see the sub-assemblies were extracted as part of that. So I'm going to come to my part libraries, and I'm going to grab all of the parts that make up that assembly, and I'm just going to drop them in here. And it doesn't matter where I put them at this point, just wherever. For time's sake, I'll just kind of scatter them around here, and we'll come back and work with these now. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is I can go in now, and I am in our punching software now. So you see I've got a Stryker Systems punch tab here. And I've got a couple of different commands here for doing auto punching. And the purpose of this webinar isn't to go into details about our CAD/CAM software portion of it. It's more, okay, how do we get the data across from SOLIDWORKS? But I did want to show you that if I went in and did apply tooling to these parts for a punch operation, and I'll just select all of them and say, you know, go ahead and punch these. And I can control options on things like, you know, is it going to automatically apply tabs and do tool sequencing, or am I going to do that after the fact? If I had text on these, do I want it to automatically process? But we'll just let it go. And there I have all of my tool hits applied with all the shaker tabs or micro joints, which I had turned on, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, in reality, if this was all new design, I'd take the time to go in and kind of analyze these, make sure they're punched okay. And if there was something that needed to be revised, I'd make a quick tooling revision. But then I could go in and say, okay, I want to take these tooled parts, and I just want to slap them right back in there. So if I go into PARTshare now, I see that there is a flat instance of each part, and there is a punched instance of each part, in this case specifically for an Amada EMK machine. Okay, and that's going to be true of all of the parts that I just went in and punched. Now, being able to take a part, tool it up, and then save it back into the library is definitely going to give us manufacturing consistency, which is more important on a punching machine because we have all of the tooling considerations. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't do this on a profile cutting machine, a laser machine, for example, as well. You can. I could take it, put a laser tool path on it, throw it into the part library with a laser tool path on it. So if I had something that was very, very specific as to where I wanted the lead to be located and where I want any shaker tabs or micro joints, yes, I could do it on a laser as well. But it's more used on a punch on standard parts that are going to be run over and over again, repeat parts just in different quantities and so on, just to make sure that there is tooling consistency. Okay, and once I do have those parts out there, if I went in and said, okay, I want to create another nest kit, and grab an assembly again. I'm going to grab that assembly we pulled from SOLIDWORKS, and we'll assign a quantity to it. I'll give it a quantity of 10, but it knows that I have a specific machine driver or post processor loaded, and that those parts have been tooled out there. And again, just like with a laser, I do have the ability to go in and dynamically process these so that it's applying the tooling on the fly. But on a punch, again, for manufacturing consistency, we see a lot more customers that are pre-applying the tools and then just saving those off in the part library. So it does have that ability. And then if I was ready, satisfied with these layouts and ready to generate a program off of these, then I just hit the button and let it go and hope that works, because actually I didn't even test this against this machine. But it has to drop that in, analyze all of the tooling, make sure that it's mapped up to the turret correctly, does the tool sequencing. In this case, it had to do a reposition because I was running an oversized sheet, and generates the NC program off of that. So NC code that was written off of that layout. Okay, and one other thing, and that kind of wraps up what I wanted to show you on PARTshare, with the exception of one thing, and that's because I forgot to mention it earlier. So if I go into PARTshare, if I come over here to these assemblies, as we've said, PARTshare is it's a storage mechanism for working between the 3D modeling software and Striker CAD/CAM, and sharing parts between Striker CAD/CAM users, and becoming the nesting depository. But one thing that it also will allow you to do is, I could take any assembly and I could say export, or I could take any part library and I could say export, or I could just select some group of parts and I could do an export. And what that does for you is that we do have some customers that maybe have a very specific manufacturing process. I know we have some that are using some specific router processes, and they have some very specific router software that they use to support those machines. And they didn't want to disrupt that by having us come in and set up a post processor, because what they had worked well. So we would use PARTshare to do their assembly extraction, because they got into some big assemblies. And one of these customers I'm thinking of, I know runs Solid Edge, but they got into big assemblies. So it would expedite that process of getting those laid out. But now all these DXF files, they're in the background here in our directory structure. So they would just go in and say, okay, now I want to export this. And basically they were sending it over to their other software. And what that does is it takes all of the DXF files and copies them to a specific directory, names the DXF file based on the part number and revision, but then it also dumps a little XML tag out there that contains all of the part manufacturing information, so material information and so on, so that somebody could write a script that would just read that information and pass it off to some other CAM software. So I just wanted to point out that that ability is also there if we have customers that use SOLIDWORKS for just that purpose and don't even have the rest of our software. Okay, so that kind of wraps up what I wanted to show you on PARTshare.
All right. Well, Mike, first, thank you for that great demonstration. I appreciate you going through it. Did a great job, as would be expected. So, everybody, hopefully you saw how useful and beneficial that PARTshare can be. And, obviously in the essence of time, we can only touch on a few of its features and benefits. And, but what I've done is I've summarized a little bit of what you saw with some bullet points here on this slide. I'm not going to go through it and insult your intelligence by reading all of them to you, so I'll give you just a minute to review these on your own. But it's a pretty comprehensive package that does a whole lot. So not only is it a repository for data, it's an interface, it's an exchange tool, it's a library, It allows for bringing in from the Inventor, SolidWorks, and Solid Edge. There's just a whole lot, the maintaining the revision history and all of that's out there. We're pretty proud of it, and what we see and hear from our customers is they rely heavily on PARTshare as a part of their sheet metal process to become more efficient each and every day. So I think you guys probably saw that with the demo, and it's pretty cool. So in short, PARTshare is looked at as it's a tool that we know can save your company some time, help reduce errors, and provide for a more efficient manufacturing and fabrication process. So we're down to the beauty pageant portion of our presentation. No, really not at all. What I want to say is, we've recorded this webinar in its entirety, and we're going to make that available to everybody in the coming days. Once we do, we're going to share this out for all of you with information on how you can assess it. So feel free to watch it again, or if you want to share it with any of your colleagues or your team members, management, or just anybody else that you think could benefit from it, feel free to do so without restriction. And additionally, feel free to reach out to Mike or myself. You see our contact information up there on the screen. If you've got any questions about PARTshare, or if you want to see more about our complete solutions, or if you want to have a discussion about what a complete CAD, CAM, and nesting solution, including PARTshare from Stryker Systems, might look like for your company, we'd be happy to set up a live custom demonstration. And when I say custom, we would use your company's assembly and part files from SolidWorks or Autodesk Inventor or Solid Edge, or your DWG or DXF files, and we'll give you a full unscripted view on how our solution can benefit your company's overall sheet metal process, and give you a good opportunity to compare and contrast how we handle and process that information versus what you're currently doing today. So everybody, I want to thank you for participating with us today. This concludes our webinar. And on behalf of the company, Stryker Systems, I really do want to thank each of you for your time and your participation. We hope that you found this to be good information. We plan on doing more in a series of these on different aspects of our product solutions. If you're out on social media, stop by and check us out. Drop by and give us a thumbs up or a like or a shout out or a comment. You can find us out on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube. We've got some great information that's out there, and we'd love for you to stop in and catch up with us out there as well. And we're beginning to push more information out that way as well. So thanks everybody for your time, and we hope that you have a great rest of your week, and look forward to talking to each of you again in the near future. Talk to you soon. Thank you.